It's the ding, ding, ding of the bell. The debate's about to start. Let's go live to the press club.
And this is the first in a series of portfolio debates. So welcome to this Westpac address. This is on climate change and energy, a huge part of this campaign and indeed the past few years of political debate between the Minister, Chris Bowen, and the Shadow Minister, Ted O'Brien. We have a series of rules that have been agreed to, including opening addresses, questions and closing addresses as well. We had a rather exciting coin toss earlier, which means we'll begin with Chris Bowen.
Well, thank you, Tom, and good afternoon, Ted. Well, let me start with a point that I think Mr O'Brien will agree with. A bipartisan note to get this debate going. That is that this election is a fork in the road when it comes to energy and climate. The Australian people do have a very real choice on May the 3rd. No one could accurately say that both parties have the same positions when it comes to energy. We do have very different plans. On the one hand, our plan, backed by the experts at the CSIRO and our energy operators and regulators. Our plan, which stays the course with an appropriate mix of more renewable energy, backed by storage, backed by gas peaking and firming, backed by household batteries, transmission and a stable system. And the good news is that this is not a trade-off. The same plan, our plan, is the right plan that delivers the cheapest, most reliable form of energy and reduces emissions in this, the critical decade for our planet. And we've made good progress in our first 3 years. 33% renewable energy on the day we came to office, 46% in the last quarter of last year. And renewables are set to overtake coal as the largest source of our electricity this year. That's good progress, but there's more to do, much more to do. And that's why this election is so important. That's why there's so much at stake, because the Liberal Party wants to stop. They want a radical change in direction. They propose the biggest change in our electricity generation ever. They dismiss the advice of the CSIRO, the energy market operator and the other experts. That's the essential difference of approach. We listen to the experts. Mr Dutton and Mr O'Brien think they know better than the experts. And that's why their plan is so risky for our country. Now, the problems with their plan are many. It's a bizarre approach, frankly, which argues that the answer to needing more, cheaper energy now is to introduce the most expensive form of energy in, by their own admission, 12 years' time. And in reality, we all know, it would be much longer than that. But the problems are even greater. The biggest issue would be the lost opportunities in the meantime. The opposition's modelling makes clear, and to their credit, they're clear about it, they see no role for renewables above 54% of our electricity by 2050. Now, let's put this in perspective. I just mentioned in the last quarter we just hit 46% renewables, and we'll pass 54% sometime in the next 2 years. And then the opposition wants to stop. No more. No more renewables installed between 2026 and 2050. Their modelling shows no room for more household batteries, not community, not grid, not household. They admit they want to run our coal-fired power system for longer and harder. Terrible for emissions, bad for prices, diabolical for reliability. Our coal-fired fleet is aged and ageing fast. It's the most precarious part of our energy system. Today, we have 4.7 gigawatts of coal-fired power broken down today. Not a day in the last 2 years hasn't seen a coal-fired power station break down somewhere in Australia. So they think the way to reduce prices is to introduce the most expensive form of energy into Australia, and they think the way to improve reliability is to lean more on the most unreliable part of our system. The LNP nuclear modelling is a heroic effort to try and make an ill-thought-out and risky scheme look vaguely credible. But their modelling crumbles like a Sayo in a blender at the lightest scrutiny. Of all the problems with their policy, the most spectacular is that they rely on Australia needing 40% less electricity to make their plan look around 40% cheaper. So their policy is based on no aluminium smelting, no steel making, no new data centres or AI, and an anaemic take-up of EVs by 2050. Now, what if they're wrong? It would leave our energy system dangerously exposed to shocks and see our economy shrink. Over the last Liberal decade, our opponents presided over 4 gigawatts of dispatchable energy leaving the grid, only replaced by 1 gigawatt of new energy. It left our country exposed. But all that would be a Sunday picnic compared to the damage caused by the Liberals' risky plan now. Now, none of this is easy. This transition is occurring against the backdrop of a global energy crisis, the effect of which, of course, we're still feeling today. And it means that energy prices are, of course, higher than I would have or would like them to be. All of us who get electricity bills, and that's pretty much all of us, see that every quarter. We live it. We know how tough families are doing. That's why we've delivered 3 rounds of energy bill relief, and this week have made one of our biggest election commitments to help families and businesses get a battery which will help them reduce their power bills permanently. The key way to help families with their energy bills is to keep going with our efforts to get more, cheaper, reliable energy connected to the grid now, today, not next decade. Not to stop that effort, to put a stop sign on all the private investment that's flowing into the Australian energy system while we wait for the most expensive form of energy to be ready, perhaps, if we're lucky, in 12 years' time. That's what's at stake at this election. I want to thank Ted for agreeing to this debate. I want to thank you all for coming and participating in this discussion about what is a key issue on May the 3rd, our different plans for Australia's energy future.
Thank you, Mr Bowen. Right on 6 minutes. Mr O'Brien.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chris. And it's wonderful to be here in a room of so many undecided voters. Tom, with your permission, shall we just proceed and ignore?
Yeah, I'm happy to proceed. Let's go. We might just restart the clock on that ribbon and start again. Mr O'Brien.
Well, thank you very much. And Chris Bowen is right about one thing. Indeed, Australia does face a fork-in-the-road moment when it comes to its energy future. Under Labor, that future will see Australia become poorer, weaker and more dependent on foreign supply chains. Under the Coalition, Australia will become richer, stronger and fiercely independent. Energy is life, energy is the economy. Indeed, energy security is national security. And how we manage energy in the years ahead will determine the sort of country we become. It will determine whether or not our children and theirs have the same opportunities which we have as a nation. It is absolutely critical. Now, as you look at those forks in the road, if you want to have a taste of what the fork looks like under Labor, consider the last 3 years and ask yourself, do you feel better off today than you did 3 years ago? Under this Albanese Labor government, Australia has seen its standard of living drop further than any other developed nation on the planet. We have seen productivity drop. We have seen more families go on hardship arrangements with their energy retailer than has ever happened in this country, ever. We've seen more companies close up, shut down. And what is driving a lot of this hardship right across the country is the fact that energy bills are too high. They are soaring. This is what it is going to look like, because it doesn't matter whether it's the market operator, it doesn't matter if it's energy experts. There is no credible commentator in this country suggesting that prices will come down under the Albanese Labor government. Now, up until just recently, Chris Bowen, Anthony Albanese and the rest of the Labor Party, they would justify their all eggs in one basket renewables only plan on an economic model. They claimed that prices were going to come down, and they set all of these targets on the basis of that economic model. But the Prime Minister only a couple of weeks ago decided to throw that economic model out. Gone. That Reputex modelling, all over now, which means here we are, walking into the next election, and neither Chris Bowen nor Anthony Albanese have any economic basis whatsoever for their energy plan. They are at sea with indeed the most radical plan to change our energy system that not only this country has ever seen, but the world has ever seen. There is not a country in the world trying to go down the path that Labor is trying to go down, a predominantly wind and solar grid. This is unheard of. And already early days it is failing. It's failing on every single count. And Australians know that because they're feeling the pain. Families are on their knees because they can't pay the bills. They're compromising their spend at home for the kids, for themselves. Businesses know it because they're closing up. And it only gets worse from here. Now, the Prime Minister calls this his own, and I quote, industrial revolution. The Treasurer says he is obsessed when it comes to his renewables only plan. And Chris often talks about how his decisions are made by his gut. I mean, seriously, you don't muck around with an energy system, which is precisely what is happening, with not a skerrick now of an economic basis behind it. Now, the Coalition's plan is very different. A Coalition's plan is based on engineering and economics. Under our plan, in the short term, one, we do not believe that we should be closing our baseload power stations prematurely, unlike Labor, which is happy to close one system without having another one ready to go. Two, we believe we need to pour more gas into the market, more gas, and a lot of it, and get it to where it needs to be. Australian gas for Australians first. And three, we believe that we need to continue with renewables and storage, but in a sensible way, one that doesn't fight against regional communities, but carries them with us. Then, in the near term, our plan is to replace retiring coal plants with zero emissions nuclear energy, bringing us back to where we should be, lined up with other advanced economies around the world. And unlike Labor, we've done the work, we've done the modelling, and we have a plan. And under our plan in the short term, we will see gas prices coming down. For industry by 15%, households 7%, and for wholesale electricity 8%, or your bill at home electricity 3%. And then along the journey to 2050, that future that will determine the life for next generations of Australians, under our plan, it is 44% cheaper than Labor's plan. The Coalition will not spend $264 billion, which Labor plans to spend as part of its experiment of all eggs in one basket, renewables only. I believe our balanced energy mix is what will ultimately deliver Australia a future where we are rich, not poor, where we are strong, not weak, and where we are fiercely independent and not dependent on foreign supply chains.
Thank you, gentlemen, both for your opening addresses. I'll go to the floor in a few minutes. A few of my own, first of all, and beginning on price. So, Mr Bowen, before the last election, you pledged energy bills to be $275 cheaper by the end of the term. What price pledge can you offer before this election, not compared to any coalition policies, but compared to the latest forecast prices? Will they go up or down?
Well, Tom, the pledge I do give is that energy prices will be cheaper under us than under Mr O'Brien. That is the pledge, because that is what we can state categorically based on the two plans. Look, anybody who predicts energy prices in this very complicated geopolitical environment, I think, is making a punt. So I'm not going to do that. I am going to say that when the alternative plan is to introduce the most expensive form of energy available in the world, which is nuclear, that's going to have an impact. And worse, while we're waiting for that, they're going to sweat the coal assets for longer and harder. And one of the things we've seen in the Australian Energy Regulator's report constantly is one of the things that drive higher prices and price spikes is unexpected outages in coal-fired power. I've told you, we've got 4.7 gigawatts of those today as it happens. That puts huge pressure on energy prices. You're going to see more of that under the Liberal plan and less of that under ours. Our plan is based on the right mix of renewables, not, as Ted mischaracterises it. We have a very carefully balanced plan based on all the expert advice, which is the lowest cost pathway, as has been outlined.
But if there's someone out there wondering what happens to their bill you can't say whether it will go up or down compared to today's prices?
Well, clearly you've seen Australian Energy Market Commission reports showing 13% reduction over 10 years. If we keep going with the current plan, that's not an election pledge, to be clear, but that is the expert view of the analysis of the work that we are doing and rolling out.
Okay. Mr O'Brien, you have made a price pledge, 7% reduction on household gas bills, as you alluded to, 3% electricity. To be clear on measuring this, is that cheaper than the latest forecast prices? And when do we measure it by? Is it by the final year of a term in office if the coalition wins power?
Tom, the analysis done independently by Frontier Economics looks at the 25-26 year. And that is the basis upon which those estimates are made of 15% lower gas prices for industry, 7% for households and 8% for wholesale electricity, which flows through around about 3%, all things being equal, to electricity bills. Now, it's notable that I can actually give you those figures because, unlike Chris's answer to you just then, they don't have anything. They've done no economic modelling. As I mentioned before, his decision-making is based on gut. The Treasurer of the country is obsessed, his own words, and the Prime Minister, in his own words, says he's creating an industrial revolution. They don't have any economic modelling. We've done the economic modelling. It's based on a comprehensive plan. We've released that. Certainly the comparison of the electricity grid, national electricity grid through to 2050, we released last year, and of course the gas policy only recently. Okay,
but that's the short term. What about by the end of the term? Do you have any pledge you can make on prices, or would you agree with Mr Bowen it's too difficult to go that far?
The modelling has been done for the first year. Now, when it comes to future years, I know why the question is so important, Tom, because the Albanese government went to the election last time promising a $275 reduction household power bills. $275. I don't know how many times I asked Chris about that in the parliament. Refused to ever concede that won't happen. That was meant to happen this year. In his own electorate, power bills have gone up by $1,300 more than what Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese had promised them. The Treasurer last night could not even bring himself to say a simple word. Sorry. Sorry we got it wrong. Sorry we promised you all through even the term of government a $275 reduction in household bills, but actually you're paying well over $1,000. And I hope Chris takes the opportunity today just to look down the barrel of the camera and say, Australians, we got it wrong. Sorry.
Okay. Mr Bowen, the coalition plan on gas just released and the modelling is essentially based on the premise of we don't have a short-term issue with gas supply. It's about prioritising it for Australians and at an affordable price. What do you think? Do we have a gas shortage or not?
Well, Tom, you mentioned opposition modelling, which I think is a generous term. I mean, this is the document. I've seen more detailed menus in a Chinese restaurant in this document. This is clearly policy on the run. It's been written after the budget reply. And in fact, this document makes clear that the opposition is not proposing an East Coast gas reservation. They say East Coast gas reservation scheme operates by providing an incentive for gas producers to offer gas to the domestic market. An incentive. Well, that's not a reservation. I mean, the closest thing we have to a reservation is our gas code of conduct, which has seen 640 petajoules of guaranteed supply. So this is a joke of a document. And in fact, it reflects very much Angus Taylor's gas-fired recovery, released in 2020, word for word. If you do a word search, you'll find it's almost a carbon copy. On the day that Mr Taylor released that, gas prices were about $4 a gigajoule. By the time of the election, they were $34.70. I mean, well done, Angus. That's the best they could do. So why would we think the plan that they implemented in 2020 would go any better in 2025?
If you're going to fix a problem, you've got to diagnose it, though. Do we have a gas shortage, in your view?
We have an issue with domestic gas supply, yes. Now, people say, well, we've got plenty of gas in Australia, and that is true, and a lot gets exported. Those export contracts were written 20 years ago, foundational contracts. I'm not going to, I imagine Mr O'Brien's not going to, rip them up. That would be unconstitutional for a start and highly irresponsible. What we do need to do is work with the gas companies to get more gas flowing domestically. I think we would agree with that. agree on that. That's what we've done, 640 petajoules. That's why I don't understand Mr O'Brien's point that somehow 100 petajoules would fix the problem when we, Madeleine King, me, Ed Husick, Jim Chalmers, working together, have got 640 petajoules of extra gas supply guaranteed to the domestic market.
Mr O'Brien, your policy focuses on the 3 exporters in Queensland and aims to get that extra 100 petajoules secured at that price. One of them, the Santos GLNG project, actually buys 150 petajoules from the Australian domestic market because it doesn't have enough in its supply to fill its export contracts. Am I right in thinking your policy does nothing about that anomaly, which is affecting the domestic market?
Tom, on the contrary, our policy actually tackles that anomaly front on. And you are dead right. There are 3 major exporters out of Queensland, and one of them actually takes gas from the domestic market in order to sell internationally. We've been very clear that the obligations on the 3 gas exporters are obligations that will rest on each of their shoulders. There will be no free riding. That has been made very clear, and I'm happy to clarify it today. And it's clear... Sorry.
Santos doesn't export. The key thing you're focusing on is uncontracted gas. Santos doesn't export that. So that policy won't affect them. That levy won't affect them.
So we've made it very clear that within the first 100 days of government, we'll be settling new arrangements with the gas industry. That includes all 3. We cannot continue to have a situation where we have one of our major gas consortium taking from the domestic market and making negative contributions. That will be part of the negotiations that will take place with the gas industry.
So that will actually take aim at Santos and limit them? Is that what you're saying?
That will involve all 3 consortia. Santos is part of one. And again, Tom, this is all laid out in a very comprehensive policy, a costed policy, the one to which Chris just mentioned and very cleverly said, what was he? He's read longer, menus at Chinese restaurants. And this is coming from the minister whose own plan wouldn't fit in a Chinese fortune cookie. If anything, that's probably where it would belong, because you'd crack it open and all it would be a slogan.
Well,
no numbers, no plan, no modelling. It's just a slogan. But they're going to create an industrial revolution because they're obsessed, and he's making decisions on gut.
Well, let's deal with that, because Ted's made the point. So here's his gas modelling. I use the term lightly. And here's the frontier nuclear modelling. I've put post-it notes on all the mistakes. So that's it. That's the modelling that the opposition proposes. Here is a small example of the reports that the government bases our expert plan on, whether it is by the AEMO, the Australian Energy Regulator, the Australian Energy Market Corporation, full analysis of the pathway that the government has set out, because we base our plan on the experts. The work of the Australian Energy Market Operator, the work of the CSIRO, the Australian Energy Market Corporation. As I said, the difference between Ted and I is neither of us are the people in Australia who know the most about the energy market. There are others. I listen to them. Ted ignores them.
I feel sorry for Reputex. I mean, the Prime Minister just threw out Reputex's model, and then Chris Bowen rocks up and goes, but we've got a new set. And the new set actually isn't even Labor modelling. It comes from the market operator. And that modelling says the total system cost of Labor's plan through to 2050, total system real cost is, Chris Bowen, how much is your plan going to cost according to the documents you just pulled out? Total system cost, real cost, not, net present values or anything like that.
Can't say, not net present value. Net present value 121 billion as is outlined.
No, real cost.
But, you carry on about...
Real cost.
Ted, you make the point about Reputex. Well, look, this is the 2025 election. I know you're trying to refight the 2022 election. I get that. This is the 2025 election. Now, we did release Reputex modelling. What Reputex modelling did not predict is the war in Ukraine. It did not predict that Angus Taylor would have a 20% electricity bill rise that he would change the law to hide. He denied that last night. It's a matter of fact.
So how much...
I might jump in here. We're throwing a lot of...
So we are now fighting the 2025... Here's your election...
We're throwing a lot of... I'm going to jump in. We're throwing a lot of numbers around.
It's not on your website anymore.
Let me put something to each of you,
here, Tom.
Mr O'Brien, Mr Bowen. Let me put something to each of you because a lot of numbers are coming around.
My simple question to the Minister, he could not answer. He just lifted up. He's got multiple folders. In that folder, he should be able to tell us what is the total system cost to get to 2050, which is exactly what those documents tell us. Minister, are you going to give the Australian people an answer? I'm telling you, our plan is going to cost $331 billion.
Well, no, it's not.
Generation, storage and transmission. How much is yours going to cost?
That's based on your frontier
How much is yours going to cost?
I'm going to definitely jump in now and not take no for an answer.
He cannot tell you the cost.
Let me ask you a simple question each, and we'll see if we can get agreement on this, because numbers in this matter, and frankly, voters get pretty confused. So, Mr O'Brien, the nuclear cost, even your own modelling, like for like, the same energy, isn't suggesting yours will be 44% cheaper than Labor, it's 21%. So you can argue around modelling, but even your modelling says 21%. Will you stop saying 44% because that compares much more energy Labor would produce under their plan compared to yours?
Tom, with due respect, I'm conscious I'm debating Chris and not you, but actually if it's the exact same amount of electricity you want to produce, the modelling looked at two scenarios. In both scenarios, once you put nuclear into the mix, it's actually 25% cheaper. 25% cheaper.
It's not 44.
Well, where 44% becomes relevant is Labor wants to build an electricity grid based on assumptions in the very documents Chris has there, actually, which says that come 2050, everybody is driving EVs, like everyone is driving an EV. Therefore, you have to overbuild the grid to accommodate that. They believe that green hydrogen is going to be so big, you need to almost double the size of the grid just
like for like, it's not 44, is it?
Yes, it is. You know why? Because you're comparing our plan, which is not to overbuild the grid, to Labor's plan to overbuild the grid. So
Labor's plan includes
money would be spent?
Exports, which you get money from. Anyway, that's my attempt on that one. I'll try this time now. $600 billion is the figure you've quoted a lot. The CSIRO Next Gen report found the cost of nuclear, just the actual building cost would actually be $116 billion. Isn't that a better authority to use than the lobby group Smart Energy Council, which has thrown up to $600 billion? Not $600 billion, but up to.
Well, Tom, I don't agree with respect the premise of the way you've asked the question, because absolutely the CSIRO should be the organisation we listen to. Mr O'Brien claims they've used the CSIRO. That's not true. It's just not right. The frontier modelling does not reflect CSIRO costings at all. And if it did, why would the alternative Deputy Prime Minister, Mr Littleproud, at the beginning of this campaign, in a most, I must say, I don't use the term lightly, improper intervention, alleged that the CSIRO was engaging with political interference from me? It was a grave insult to the CSIRO, and he and Ted on his behalf should apologise. What the opposition has done is use frontier modelling to ignore the CSIRO on operating costs, to ignore the CSIRO's point about first-of-kind costs, to ignore the CSIRO's point about the cost of refurbishing nuclear reactors as they go. They certainly haven't taken into account the cost of refurbishing coal, if you're going to rely on it longer. They've pushed a lot of the cost on beyond 2050. You know, they cut the limit off at 2050. So the 600... Sorry?
It's pulling this back to that figure of 600. That is an absolute maximum figure quoted by one lobby group.
You could argue it's conservative, but it's because of the cost blowouts we've seen overseas. Ted says, when he's asked about how can you ensure there's no cost blowouts in Australia, he says, I've done my homework, which I do find
600 assumes all the worst cost blowouts from the worst projects.
Well, no, I think it's a very carefully calibrated real-world cost example.
Top-end one, absolute top-end.
No, I think that you could make...
But that group, the top end was 600, the bottom was 120.
Well, as I said, they've done real-world examples based on an analysis of what has been happening around the world. When Mr O'Brien claims...
Tom, this is important.
Very briefly, before I go to
Can I please come in on this? So, you notice that Chris Bowen could not answer the question. He can't explain the $600 billion. He can't explain it. In his opening remarks, and even just then, he talked about the importance of listening to the CSIRO. If you look at the capital cost of a nuclear program under the CSIRO, Chris Bowen and the Labor Party are multiplying that by a factor of 5. to get to $600 billion. It is an utter lie. Under our plan, it will be up to $120 billion, which is consistent with CSIRO.
Okay.
They have multiplied it by 5. It is an outright lie. And can I say, you've got your political opponents on the ropes when the best argument they can come out with is a complete and utter lie.
Well, again, I don't know.
Before I get to Greg,
if Ted is now wrapping himself in the CSIRO, I don't know why Mr. Dutton and Mr. Littleproud, let's say Ted to be fair, have been most improperly impunging the CSIRO. What you've ignored in the CSIRO report is you have not counted their first-of-kind premium.
But our policy is not first of a kind.
Well, it is in Australia, Ted. It is in Australia. We don't have any nuclear reactors. It will be first of kind. That's a rather large admission.
Chris doesn't know the policy. We've been very clear. Australia should not be adopting first-of-a-kind reactors. It's next-of-a-kind. So, Chris, please, maybe read the policy.
On that point,
Ted, if you're building a reactor in Australia, first-of-a-kind in Australia, I'm sorry you've missed that point.
Greg Brown will never forgive me if he doesn't get a question now. He's from the Australian newspaper.
Greg Brown from the Australian. Just a slightly different question for each of you on 2030 targets. Mr. Bowen, you've said that the Reputex modelling isn't relevant anymore because circumstances have changed. And why is it? What is your justification for sticking with the 2030 targets for both renewables and emissions reductions that you directly plucked from that modelling? And Mr. O'Brien, Mr. Dutton has said that a coalition government will not stick with a 43% emissions reduction target. Does that mean you will change Australia's target at Paris to lower it? And does it mean that you will repeal legislation, the 43% legislation that Mr. Bowen introduced?
Who would you like to go first, Tom?
You begin on Mr. Bowen.
43, because we're on track to meet it. Very close now, 42. In accord with the last figures I released, which is prepared at arm's length from me. That's a great national achievement. 26 to 28 when it came to office, lifted now to 42. Bit of work to do to get to 43, but a very big step forward. And that is in our national interest. It's important for the planet, but also it's important because we believe that the best way we can future-proof the Australian economy and create the jobs of the future is to lead the world in our efforts in relation to making sure that our goods are decarbonised and that we can honestly compete in a world which is demanding those decarbonised efforts. So 43 is an appropriate level. There have been plenty of people, including some friends outside, who would say it should be higher. It's substantially higher than what the coalition could achieve, and I'm very proud of the fact we're now back on track to achieve it.
But in fairness, when there's a debate about these targets, including the business community being increasingly uncomfortable about the 82% target, your government is saying we're going to stick with these targets, but you've abandoned the modelling that you took it from.
No, we've pointed out that modelling was done in 2021 and there's some things that they could not have been expected to predict. But nevertheless, the policies that we've put in place have got us on track for 43 and got us on track for 82. I mean, a while ago there was commentary saying we might not meet 82, and I understood that, respect that.
That's what many experts still say, you're not on track for 82.
No, well, you'll find many experts say that we are now on track.
Climate Change Authority said you needed more policies even in November.
Well, look at the Clean Energy Council's latest data, which says explicitly Australia is now back on track for 82. I think that's a good thing. You might disagree.
Mr. O'Brien, question 2 from Greg that he asked.
Will you change Australia's international commitment?
Greg, it's interesting listening to Chris Bowen because Labor will often say that it's so important that it has its climate change and energy policies. They know Australians are hurting right now. They know businesses are shutting down. But they probably, hand on heart, believe they're saving the planet. When they came to office, the Coalition had reduced emissions by 29% on 2005 levels. You know what it is today? Around 29%. They actually haven't budged. This is the problem. Emissions aren't even going down. So our position, to answer your question directly, Labor, the Coalition, nobody in this country will be able to achieve the emission target set by Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese. The difference between Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese is Peter Dutton has been very honest and upfront about that. Labor continue to lie to the Australian people, including Chris today, oh, we're going to get there. No one thinks they're going to get there, as if they're going to get there.
But does that mean you'll officially lower our nationally determined contribution?
When it comes to what contributions we sign up to, again, we've been very clear. We're going to do something they didn't do. We are actually going to do the analysis. And then we're going to work out what is going to be the impact of emissions reduction on families in Australia, on regional Australia and on businesses in Australia. When Chris Bowen walked into the Parliament and decided to legislate for that target, we put forward a motion to amend it to say, can you at least get the Productivity Commission to first look at the impact in the real world on the Australian people and businesses? He refused to do that. Here we are. We will not be setting targets from opposition. Once we set targets from government, it would be based on, number one, the trajectory of emissions, number two, the state of the economy, and number three, our own suite of climate and energy policies.
You can get one at the end. We've got to move through some more people. You'll be first in the queue for a second, I promise. Melissa Code from the Mandarin.
Thank you both for your speeches. A recent report by the Centre for Policy Development looked at the attitudes towards what the community believes politicians are doing when it comes to short-term policies and long-term policies. And I'd like your reflection in terms of which side you believe addresses both or either of those things. And then a sort of comment on capability. The Coalition's nuclear plan is ambitious, but it's complex. The chance of a complex and ambitious policy standing up and being realised depends on public service capability, and we've seen that in other places around the world where those complex nuclear projects have come to pass. How does that wash with the Coalition's desire to compress the size of the public service?
Melissa, thank you very much for the question. And I think you're right in that Australians are calling out not just for a set of short-term policies, but long-term policies. And I hope that you would understand that the policy suite we have put together, which does involve predominantly pouring more gas in the short term and then nuclear in the long term, hopefully meets that expectation. When it then comes to the importance of the public service, we have been very clear that under our plan, we believe that we need to leverage the existing regulatory architecture, and that includes our PANZA, which is the regulator. And so, in fact, under our plan, we are recognising the skills and the capability, which, by the way, are renowned around the world as being first class when it comes to nuclear technology as a regulator. So under our nuclear plan, we want to expand our PANZA so that it has the ability to licence and monitor civil nuclear power plants. We have also said that under our plan, we believe that the Australian people should own those power plants, which would mean a new government business enterprise. We believe Australia has the capability to do nuclear. I know that Chris Bowen and Labor says, oh, we can't do it, we can't do it. We back Australia to do it. And that includes the men and women of the public service. We're pro-Australia. We think Australia has the capability. We already are a nuclear nation, and if we work together with ambition, then we can join other advanced economies and get power prices down with a balanced energy mix, renewables, gas, and as coal exits the system, zero emissions nuclear energy.
In relation to your question about long-term plans, I agree. And I actually think this is an optimistic story for Australia that we can tell and live. What if we get this right? There's plenty of doom and gloom about the impacts of climate change, and it's all accurate. What's at risk and stake is true. But what we can do is say to Australia, here is a vision of our country where we get this right. We seize the opportunities. We have the best renewables in the world. More sunlight hits our country than any other planet in the world. We have above average wind. It would be a massive own goal to ignore that. We can seize it. We can create the jobs of the future. We can create investment. We can help the rest of the world decarbonise with our green hydrogen exports, which Ted doesn't think will ever happen. I think are hard, but will happen. You know, when Ted again criticises me and the Prime Minister for using the term industrial revolution. I'm sorry, it is. It is that big. I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a massive opportunity for our country. It doesn't all roll out smoothly like in a linear graph in a glossy document. You have challenges and you have setbacks. You deal with them, you grow the economy, you create jobs of the future, you create jobs so that young people don't have to leave regions. If they live in an energy-producing region, they don't have to leave if they want to stay. We'll create new jobs and new energy.
If it's an industrial revolution you want, Minister, don't you think it might be important to do the economic modelling to tell the Australian people the impact?
Yeah, well, I think it would be.
You've done it a few times.
We have, and it would be better if you did.
Ask each other. If I can jump in here, you can formally ask each other a question here. There have been a few so far. This is a chance to do it without me trying to interrupt you. You seem very keen to do so, Mr O'Brien. Would you like to ask a question of Mr Bowen?
Well, why don't I ask just that question so it's even clearer to the Australian people, Tom? We know, Minister, that you committed to reduce power bills by $275, and I think we both know that has been a failure. You now say, by bringing out a whole bunch of folders, that you've done the work, or at least the market operator's done work. But no matter how many times I've asked you in this debate so far, you still cannot tell us the real cost through to 2050. Not the NPV, the real cost. Now, if you actually look at AEMO's own spreadsheets and do the calculation, it's well over $600 billion. So my question, therefore, to you, Minister, again, is can you please tell the Australian people the total system cost of your plan to get the national electricity market to net zero by 2050 in real terms?
You've mentioned that I referred to a whole heap of documents, and I have, and I make no apologies for that, because that is the framework that we are basing our policies on. And I make no apologies for pointing out to you that AEMO says the most accurate way, the best way of describing the least cost pathway to net zero, and particularly in our electricity system, is that 122 billion net present value. Now, you can dismiss that. You cherry-pick the figures the way that you want to present them, and that's your right, of course. But that is what the experts say is the best way.
That was my question.
Hang on. I didn't interrupt your question.
Well, it was my question, so I will interrupt you.
Okay.
We're not after the NPV. No one here walks into a shop and says, oh, how much is a bottle of milk? And, you know, the shopkeeper says, oh, do you want an NPV on that? No, just tell us how much it costs. So how much is it going to cost?
You can dismiss the way that AEMO says is the most accurate way of describing it. I choose
I'm criticising the way you're describing it because you're avoiding the question.
You've said, why didn't we...
You're avoiding the question.
Why wouldn't you model the economic impact? I would say to that, well, you have. And you have come up with an economy 44% smaller, electricity use 44% smaller than what we're basing our plan.
We're 44% cheaper, but that's okay.
Well, only because it's 44% smaller. Now, you could predict a cheaper education system with 44% less students in 2050 if you wanted to. It wouldn't be accurate, but you could do it, and that's exactly what you've done.
Tom, I'm okay giving away some of my time to give Chris Bowen more time if he is prepared to answer the question I asked, which was how much is it going to cost, total system cost, real cost through 2050?
He's got 20 more seconds. I'll let him finish and he can...
Well, again, Ted avoids the question about why...
I'm asking the question. Go ahead, answer.
You just said you're going to give up the time, and then you just keep talking.
Go ahead. I'm zipped up.
OK, that's good news. Why would you assume a 44% smaller economy, even if you're right, even if you're correct about that? I'm not here to say that, you know, every single thing that AEMO has in 2050 is going to be word for word accurate, but I would work on the basis that they are, which prepares our economy to be as strong and robust as possible. That's what we're doing. That's what you're refusing to do. My question to you, Ted, is that you and I would, I think, both agree that there are people who know plenty about the energy system in Australia. You and I have learnt a lot, but there's plenty of people who've devoted their lives to the economics of the energy system, whether it's the CSIRO, the people who keep our lights on at AEMO, or even people like Bill Gates who promote nuclear overseas but say nuclear is not the right answer for Australia, or Fatih Birol, the executive director of the International Energy Agency, who says nuclear's got a place in the world but not Australia. All of them agree that renewable energy backed by gas And batteries is the cheapest option for Australia's unique grids and our opportunities, and nuclear is too expensive. So my question to you is, why do you know better? And if you're in government, would you only listen to people you agree with? And what would you do with the experts who tell you, Minister, you're wrong?
Chris, thanks for the question. What I would do, which is different from how you have managed the energy system, is I'd be led by the engineering and the economics. Unlike the approach that you've taken, we would actually do the work and do the economics. We wouldn't have Peter Dutton out there trying to say we want to have an industrial revolution. We wouldn't have Angus Taylor as the Treasurer saying that he's obsessed with a particular technology. And I can assure you that, unlike you, I wouldn't be saying I'm just making decisions on my gut. In terms of who knows best, there are a lot of people who know a lot of things about energy, and those who are prepared to do the work, do the sums, are the ones to whom we listen. A total system cost analysis has been done, comparing Labor's plan to the Coalition's plan. That comparison shows that the Coalition's plan is 44% cheaper, $264 billion cheaper than Labor's plan. Now, when it comes to what we should look at, what we should consider, it's the engineering, the economics. Now, when it comes to Chris's comments, Chris, you make about, why do you know better? The conclusion the frontier economics reached on looking at nuclear, working with renewables and gas, being 44% cheaper, that's comparable to the United States Department of Energy. They said about 37% when you put nuclear in. When I've sat down with the Japanese department, looking at their details, they say that nuclear in the mix brings prices down. Ontario, Canada, brings prices down. And so, Chris, what is it that Anthony Albanese and you know that the United States doesn't know, Japan doesn't know, Canada doesn't know, the UK doesn't know, the United Arab Emirates doesn't know, India doesn't know, China doesn't know? I mean, seriously, we've got 32 countries in the world today using nuclear energy, another 50 looking at adopting it for the very first time. Why? Because it can work in a complementary way with renewables and with gas and get prices down. But Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen somehow, despite the fact he hasn't even read the policy, given his previous comments about, first-of-a-kind reactors, somehow they know better than the rest of the world.
There was a question in there, but I'm going to give the next one to my patient colleague, Chris Uhlmann from Sky News.
Yeah, Chris Uhlmann, Sky News contributor, and I'll ask my questions in turn if I may there, Tom, and I'll start with the Minister, Chris Bowen. Chris Bowen, in December 2021, you commissioned modelling which showed, and you pledged, that you would drop power prices by $275 for residential homes. You committed to it again in April 2022 when you were told that modelling was flawed. You continued to commit to it in 2023 and 2024 even though electricity prices were rising. You continued to be committed to it when you started subsidising power bills. And now this year, as subsidies now have cracked through a new record and they're going through to the end of the year, you're spending billions of dollars on that. You are now claiming that electricity price falls due to subsidies are a fall in an electricity bill. Now, electricity prices are rising, aren't they, Minister? That's written into every electricity bill, isn't it, Minister? And if you can't admit that simple fact here today, why should anyone believe anything that you say?
Well, thanks very much for the question, Chris. I'm not exactly sure what your question is really in reality. You've got strong views about... Sorry, you asked...
Are electricity prices going up
Chris, you asked the question. I didn't interrupt you. Yeah, I didn't interrupt your question. Do I get to answer it? Do I get to answer it? Thank you. You've got strong views about these matters, which you express on Sky News in the evenings, and that's your right. I disagree with the way that you look at these matters. I disagree with the approach that you take, respectfully. I think that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy. You disagree with me. You disagree with the CSIRO. You're perfectly entitled to that point of view. I have said at the outset, in my opening remarks, energy prices are higher than I'd like them to be. Of course they are. I think everyone would say that. I think normal Australians at home also look around the world and know that people around the world are dealing with similar issues. Countries with different policies in place are all dealing with high energy prices. With great respect, It's disingenuous and dishonest of you to blame all this on renewable energy as you do on Sky in the evenings. It's just not right, sir. It's just not fair. You're entitled to that view.
I'll ask a very, very simple question. Have electricity prices risen on your watch the exact opposite of what you pledged? Have they?
We have never denied that energy prices are higher than we would like. That's why we've delivered 3 rounds of energy bill relief.
In the Treasurer's speech, you wrote, electricity prices have fallen. That's not true, is it?
Well, the fact of the matter is, if you look at the recent data, Australia's had the lowest energy inflation in the world.
Why?
No,
Because
you might deny that, and I know you deny several things.
What is the reason for it? What is the reason for it?
Mr Ewan, are you asking a question or are you debating?
No, it's just that you are completely avoiding it, as you always do. We get a
Well, I know you're a man of strong views on these matters, and I said I've always had respect for you, but I have a fundamentally different view to the one that you have developed in recent years, which you express on Sky News.
So if your premise on renewables is true, electricity prices will fall in your next term.
Well, again, I refer you to the Australian Energy Market Commission report, which says if we keep the path we're on, energy prices would fall by 13% over the next 10 years. You might deny that, I don't.
Question to Ted O'Brien. Ted O'Brien, you want to drop the price of gas. You're trying to get it out of Queensland. The pipelines are full. So how will you get the gas out of Queensland? The other question on that front is you're looking at uncommitted gas. What do you think will happen to uncommitted gas in Queensland when you remove the incentives?
Chris, on the first question, this is why infrastructure is so key. And so much as our gas reservation policy has captured the imagination of many people, because it is really putting Australian gas for Australians first, you're right that we still have to get it to where it's needed. And that's why we talk about a comprehensive policy suite. One of the measures in that suite is a $1 billion critical infrastructure fund. Now, the priority for spending that money is going to be to try and accelerate and future-proof the infrastructure needed from north to south, Queensland to the southern markets. The second part of my answer to that would be time. The real risk is the winter peaks, which is why what we need to do is ensure we are maximising the transportation of gas from Queensland south.
Time to build the pipeline, which is how long?
So that was part of the first question. That will not solve for next year, which is why this second part is so key. Timing is key. So we need to get gas from Queensland south while we only have the existing infrastructure before winter hits. Now, the only way that's going to work is it needs to come down south prior to the peak, and storage becomes absolutely key. And that is something that we believe that we can get done.
This will be in place in the next 3 years?
In the next 3 years, in order to solve for that short-term problem. And the storage is going to be the key.
And you're committed to that?
In terms of enough storage over the next 3 years, yes. I think the real problem, Chris, to be honest, is we need to get the gas. We need to get the gas down. Okay. And I believe the reservation scheme will allow for that.
Next question, Tom Lowry from the ABC.
Thanks to both of you for being here today. Just firstly to the Minister, the idea of an East Coast gas reservation scheme does have a few friends on the progressive side of politics. The Australian Institute, who backed the Coalition's idea, probably surprising friends for Mr O'Brien. David Pocock's advocated for something similar. The Greens have made similar noises. Can you rule out considering an East Coast reservation scheme should you be re-elected?
Yeah, thanks, Tom, because what we've done is, I think the closest thing we have to a reservation is our policy, which is the gas code of conduct, which the opposition opposed. That is what has seen 640 petajoules of gas supply added domestically. So that is the closest thing we have to a reservation. It's not technically a reservation. I think it's the closest thing, much closer than Mr O'Brien's offering, which is, we now know, based on the evidence on the document he released yesterday, an incentive, not a reservation at all. So yes, I mean, I think the principle that there should be enough Australian gas for Australian users is a sound one. That's why we've taken the difficult decision to introduce the gas code of conduct. Wasn't easy, was controversial. Opposition and others opposed it. Opposition and the Greens opposed it. But we managed to get it through. And it has seen those 640 petajoules flow. And I think that's appropriate because we do need to ensure the right amount of gas for Australian industrial users in particular, as well as electricity and home heating. But industry is what really, I think, drives the need. And that's a good thing. So my answer to that would be, in effect, we have tackled that problem with the gas code of conduct.
And just briefly for Mr O'Brien, should the coalition fall short at this election, and I know there's still weeks to go in this election campaign, would you end your advocacy for nuclear power? Would you take that as a rejection by the Australian people of nuclear energy?
Well, firstly, can I say that is a wild hypothetical.
Not as such, but...
Look, we are looking at pouring more gas in the short term and introducing nuclear in the near term, not because we're driven by polls, but because, hand on heart, that's in our national interest. It is the right thing to do. It is why other countries all around the world are now introducing nuclear energy. It's in Australia's interest, and therefore we have no intention of changing our view on that. We'll always have to focus on what is right for Australia.
If everything gets kicked back 3 years, which is what it would mean in that wild hypothetical, would it be too late at that point?
Tom, you're getting even more wild here. So, look, I don't want to tempt the suggestion that we should be delaying action here. Australia is already behind the 8 ball when it comes to zero emissions nuclear energy. The sooner we get going, the better. We have to remember that even though nuclear will take a good decade before it comes online, even so it has proven around the world to be the fastest way to decarbonise electricity grids, faster than any other form of technology through the historical examples. So we can't delay, we need to get on with it. And again, remembering it's not just about nuclear. It's working as a balanced energy mix with renewables, with gas.
Ryan Kropp from the AFR.
Hi, both. A question for both of you on power prices. Political leaders have been promising cuts to power prices for close to 20 years now, and it's fair to say that over that period prices have only gone up. Both of your parties have made promises to cut power prices. Given the scale of the task required to replace Australia's ageing coal-fired power fleet, do you think political leaders need to be more honest with voters about the costs of the transition? And are you concerned that repeated broken promises on prices will undermine the political support required to bring Australia's energy grid into the modern age?
Well, thanks, Ryan. I understand your question. That's why I was careful in the answer to the first question. Well, it would have been easy for me to make a commitment about power prices when you've got geopolitical, economic environment changing so rapidly. I chose not to because it is difficult to predict. And you're right. You know, we said things in the last lecture. Angus Taylor said things at the 2019 lecture about power prices, which he missed by a country mile as well. That is correct that those promises have been made, including by Angus Taylor, and then he did hide an energy price rise at the last election, which I thought was the most cynical thing I've seen in politics. Look, what we say is, as I've said several times, I don't pretend this is easy. I mean, we're not doing this for fun. We're doing this because the planet depends on it and because it's a massive economic opportunity for our country. That's why. And because some fundamental things don't change. The fundamentals that renewables are the cheapest form of energy, even with the cost of storage, even with the cost of transmission, renewables remain the cheapest form of energy. That's what the science tells me. Others disagree, including some who've asked me questions today. But it's true. It happens to be true. Does that mean it's easy or without setbacks? No. But that fundamental truth remains. And that is why we have to stay the course on that, not the risky change of course to cap renewables at 54%, as Ted would like to do, and wait for nuclear, which might or might not work. It would take at least 12 years, even on his calculation. We choose a different course, which is, we say to the Australian people, the best way forward because it's based on all the science and evidence.
Oh, look, Ryan, you just asked both Chris Bowen and me a question about honesty. And Chris, your answer is full of lies, mate. Well, I mean, talking about the coalition.
Don't you agree that renewables are the cheapest form of energy? What's in your modelling? It's in your modelling. 54%. It's in your document.
Here, Ryan, is the problem. I think you're spot on with your question. And at the end, I think you said something about, you didn't use the expression social licence, but in order for people to come on the journey, right? I believe a big problem we've seen over the last 3 years has been the treatment of regional Australia in particular, who's carrying the burden of Labor's policies. They've been steamrolled here. And you can't expect communities, let alone the whole country, to come with you when you treat them with reckless indifference. That also comes, therefore, to the energy transformation itself, which is why we've been very clear. Here are all our economic costings. This is what it is, open for criticism. Here are all the assumptions. We did that last year in terms of the journey to 2050. We've done that when it comes to the gas policy. We've been very clear about some of the risks here. I mean, one of the biggest risks under Labor is the network charges, right? Which is why before I was saying our gas policy will get the wholesale down by 8%, but it's only about 3% of your retail bill. That's because Labor's building up to 28,000 kilometres of transmission lines. We don't know the impact yet next year on that.
Just very quickly, so frontier economic models have renewables at 54% of the energy mix. Is that your policy to cap renewables at that percent?
No, there's no policy that we have which is capping any technology. Again, it's why I refer to sort of, again, it's a dishonesty.
That means your modelling's wrong.
On Chris's behalf.
Your modelling's wrong or the policy's wrong. Both can't be true. Your modelling says 54%. Both can't be true.
Thanks for the tip, Chris. So given, again, the modelling has been done, estimating the amount of technology from each energy source. And you're right, renewables are going to be key. So too will gas, so too will storage, so too will nuclear. But when you say cap, well, cap suggests that you put a firm level and no more. That's never been our policy. It's not our policy on gas. It's not our policy on renewables. It's not our policy on nuclear.
Dan Jevasparty from The Guardian.
Just a couple of questions on targets. First to you, Mr O'Brien. So just to clarify, you've said that if you win the election, if you form government, that you'll commission an analysis into how we're tracking in terms of emissions reduction. If that analysis comes back, and I appreciate this is a hypothetical, but if the analysis comes back and shows that we're not on track for either 43%, 82% of renewables or net zero by 2050, the coalition would be prepared to submit new targets to the UN regardless of the implications for us in Paris.
So I'm glad at least your hypothetical isn't built on the other hypothetical that we don't win government. So my answer is same as what I said before. Our commitment is this. When it comes to establishing future targets, we need to account for three things. One, the trajectory of emissions. Two, the state of the Australian economy. And three, the suite of our policies, not Labor's policies. That will allow us to then understand the art of the possible. We want to ensure that we are growing this country, not, decarbonising it is good, deindustrialising it like Labor is bad. Once we've done that analysis, then we'll be making decisions along the lines that you pose. So I won't be preempting today, with all due respect, that hypothetical.
You're prepared, all of those things considered, that if it is in the national interest, to potentially leave Paris?
I can commit that we will always act in the national interest and we'll be upfront with the Australian people.
Just very quickly to Mr Bowen, the Queensland Government has announced it's going to review its targets. If they were to walk away from their emissions reduction targets, how much harder would it be for Australia to achieve its targets?
Yeah, thanks, Dan, for the question. And I'm disappointed to hear Ted not answer because, in effect, he couldn't confirm staying in Paris or leaving, because if you change the 43% target, you're leaving Paris. But anyway, matter for him.
And you're happy for Australia to go broke along the way to achieve yours, Chris?
Matter for him. In relation to Queensland, there's a common misconception, I'm not criticising your question, but there's a common misconception that when we set national targets, we take into account the state targets. We don't. We don't take into account the state renewable energy targets because it's not simply a matter of adding them up and coming up with a national target. What we do is look through those targets and consider the impact of policies at the state level and the local level for that matter. And then that feeds into our national target. And we do that very carefully. So whether the Queensland Government changes its renewable energy target is frankly not material to our national target. Their policies are, and we will look at the implications of their announcements on Callide and see what that means for our projections, but that'll be done in the normal course of events, and that'll reflect. One of the things we've done that I'm pleased with is introduce much more transparency into the system. I give an annual report on projections and forecasts to Parliament, which is tabled, and it'll all be reflected there.
All right, I've run things a little over budget myself. I'll ask you to stick with 1 minute for your final observations, if you will, beginning with you, Mr Bowen.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's been a great debate. In the last 3 years, I'm pleased with what we've been able to do, but not satisfied. We've got a lot more to do. When the Liberal Party left office, wholesale electricity prices were $317 and rising, now they're $88. When they left office, gas was $34 a gigajoule, and now it's $14. The Liberals want to secure 50 petajoules of new gas. They say that's a great thing. We've already secured almost 650 petajoules. We've added the equivalent of more than 3 snowy hydro schemes worth of electricity to the grid. We've added more dispatchable electricity to the grid than the amount that Angus Taylor could do in a decade. We've all done that in 3 years. Under the last government, 24 coal-fired plants announced their closure dates, but the LNP failed to plan for the future. They failed any replacement electricity. That's why they oversaw 4 gigawatts of dispatchable energy leaving the grid and only 1 come on. We've done a lot, but there's a lot more to do. We need to stay the course, we need to listen to the experts, and that's what we'll do if we get a second term.
When Peter Dutton says that he wants to get Australia back on track, he's talking very much about the Australian economy, because the economy isn't an end unto itself. It's the means by which we can ensure families which are struggling today can have an easier life. It means that we can ensure that vital services are provided to the Australian public, and it means that businesses can grow. But none of that can happen if we continue going down Labor's path when it comes to energy. An all eggs in one basket, renewables only approach is already failing, leaving Australians to pay among the highest electricity prices in the world. The Coalition has a plan. It's the only party of government that has a plan and the economics to back it up, to ensure that Australia can have a balanced energy mix with cheaper, cleaner and consistent 24/7 power, so that not just cost of living is eased, but our future is one that is rich and not poor, strong and not weak, and fiercely independent, not dependent on foreign supply chains. Thanks for listening today.
Gentlemen, thank you both for coming. You get to, of course, you've contributed to democracy. That's your reward, as well as membership of the club. You can perhaps book a table together and have a chat about energy policy. Please shake hands. Please, everyone, welcome. Thanks, Ted and Chris O'Brien, for coming along. Hello, welcome to this special program, The Energy Debate, The Response. Thanks for joining us, and with thanks for the support of industry partners, Minerals Council of Australia, Australian Energy Producers and Clean Energy Council. A short time ago, of course, we heard from Energy and Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen and the Shadow Minister Ted O'Brien at the debate at the National Press Club. Now, industry leaders are joining us for their response to the major parties' plans for Australia's energy and climate future. So we've got the Minerals Council of Australia CEO Tanya Constable here to my left, Kane Thornton from the Clean Energy Council, and also we have Samantha McCulloch from the Australian Energy Producers. Thank you all for your time today. Look, there's a lot to digest. I guess you can stick to debate or something else. I'm not going to be prescriptive. What's your reaction to today and where we're sitting? To you, first of all, Tanya, as we're 2 weeks into an election, I guess, and part of our way to our energy future.
Well, it was good to see that energy was discussed today, because it is such a big issue in cost of living, and energy is the backbone of the economy. So it was good to see that both set out what they see as their energy plan for the future. For the Minerals Council, we're a big user of energy and we support all of the energy types that were discussed today, but clearly we want to see a mix of energy out to 2050, because we support net zero by 2050, and it makes sense to see renewables rolled out, gas and nuclear for the future, but we need to keep that important energy source of coal in the system until we see other energy sources coming in. Otherwise, we won't have reliable, affordable energy.
Kane, what did you think of today?
Yeah, well, firstly, it was a pretty intense debate. I think it was good to see the discussion about energy policy. It's such a critical issue, obviously, for the nation and in the lead up to the election. A lot of numbers thrown around. I think what's very clear is predicting the future is very, very difficult, and there's a whole body of modelling and assumptions that go into that. I think at the end of the day, I think what's clear is that there's a real focus on lowering power prices and making sure that we're bringing in the technologies and the solutions that will do that. From my perspective, important and pleased to see, consensus about the important role of renewables and bringing in as much of that as we can, and then clearly some real divergence of views around other technologies, the role of nuclear, the role of gas, the future of coal in the market.
I guess we're interesting at this point now where the net zero debate is gone and everyone is agreeing on a certain amount of renewables, but the other element has diverged further. So more agreement in one area and more divergence in another within energy in Australia. Yeah,
there's been a story of energy policy over many years, in fact decades here in Australia, and I think it's fair to say that tension and debate is alive and well.
Samantha McCulloch, if you wanted lots of talk about gas today, you got it. What have you made? Because we had just before this debate some of the detail behind what the coalition is going to do, it says, on gas if it wins power. The initial speech from Peter Dutton, of course, in his budget in reply, and some more of the detail. And even I thought some fresh detail today from Ted O'Brien. What have you made of it?
Yeah, no, Tom, you're right. And I think the recognition of that important role for gas in the mix is very much welcome. We need strong bipartisan support for gas. We know this is key to helping alleviate some of the pressures in the energy system in terms of bringing down costs as well. We need to get more gas into the system, and having bipartisan recognition and support of that is certainly welcome. I think where we diverge is sort of how we do that in a sustainable way. And you're right, we heard some further details from the coalition today about their plans for the East Coast market. Still a lot of details and questions to be answered, I think, which we can get into. But given the importance of energy, as Tanya said, to our economy, the fact that our competitive advantage has really been built on having affordable and reliable energy, this is such an important debate for the election, but also the economy.
Yeah, there was an interesting detail about Santos, which I'm going to get your thoughts on later, because you know more than most in this area. Also in the studio, my panel will be here throughout the program, but our Sky News political contributor, Chris Ullman, joins me in the studio. Chris, we'll take a look, first of all, at your exchange with Chris Bowen at the National Press Club. This was during the debate a short time ago.
Chris Bowen, in December 2021, you commissioned modelling which showed, and you pledged, that you would drop power prices by $275 for residential homes. You committed to it again in April 2022 when you were told that modelling was flawed. You continued to commit to it in 2023 and 2024, even though electricity prices were rising. You continued to be committed to it when you started subsidising power bills. And now this year, as subsidies now crack through a new record and they're going through to the end of the year, you're spending billions of dollars on that. You are now claiming that electricity price falls due to subsidies are a fall in an electricity bill. Now, electricity prices are rising, aren't they, Minister? That's written into every electricity bill, isn't it, Minister? And if you can't admit that simple fact here today, why should anyone believe anything that you say?
Well, thanks very much for the question, Chris. I'm not exactly sure what your question is really in reality. You've got strong views about... Sorry, you asked...
Are electricity prices going up,
Chris, you asked
or down?
The question. I didn't interrupt you. Yeah, I didn't interrupt your question. Do I get to answer it? Do I get to answer it? Thank you. You've got strong views about these matters, which you express on Sky News in the evenings, and that's your right. I disagree with the way that you look at these matters. I disagree with the approach that you take, respectfully. I think that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy. You disagree with me. You disagree with the CSIRO. You're perfectly entitled to that point of view. I have said at the outset, in my opening remarks, energy prices are higher than I'd like them to be. Of course they are. I think everyone would say that. I think normal Australians at home also look around the world and know that people around the world are dealing with similar issues. Countries with different policies in place are all dealing with high energy prices. With great respect It's disingenuous and dishonest of you to blame all this on renewable energy as you do on Sky in the evenings. It's just not right, sir. It's just not fair. You're entitled to that view.
I'll ask a very, very simple question. Have electricity prices risen on your watch the exact opposite of what you pledged? Have they?
We have never denied that energy prices are higher than we would like. That's why we've delivered 3 rounds of energy bill relief.
In the Treasurer's speech you wrote, electricity prices have fallen. That's not true, is it?
Well, the fact of the matter is, if you look at the recent data, Australia's had the lowest energy inflation in the world.
Why?
You might deny that, and I know you deny several things.
What's the reason for it? What is the reason for it?
Mr Ewan, are you asking a question or are you debating?
No, it's just that you are completely avoiding it, as you always do. We get a
well, I know you're a man of strong views on these matters, and I said I've always had respect for you, but I have a fundamentally different view to the one that you have developed in recent years, which you express on Sky News.
So if your premise on renewables is true, electricity prices will fall in your next term.
Well, again, I refer you to the Australian Energy Market Commission report, which says if we keep the path we're on, energy prices would fall by 13% over the next 10 years. You might deny that, I don't.
So, Chris, what did you make of today's debate, that exchange, or indeed any of the hour and a bit that we saw down at the National Gallery?
I think the takeaway from all of it is that no major party has a way to get us to cheaper power prices, and that is the truth. And that truth should be told to the Australian people. And the reason Chris Bowen and I were having that debate was because back in 2022, I interviewed him at length about his policy. And I said to him that power prices would rise, not fall, because it was fundamentally flawed. And it's fundamentally flawed because it's based on the idea that renewable energy, wind and solar, are cheap. They are when they generate, but they don't generate most of the time. And the power price is not set by the lowest cost of generation. The power price is set by the highest cost of generation, and neither of those two things were actually ever addressed in the Reputex modelling. So it was always going to be wrong, and spectacularly wrong. And the only thing I seek from people like Chris Bowen and people in public life is that they're honest with the Australian people. The honest conversation is, if you want to continue on this path, this is what's going to happen. Power prices are going to rise, and if we don't get it right, the grid is going to become less stable. Now, all those things have been borne out. They're written in people's electricity bills. And every time, Thomas, someone talks to you about modelling, like the Reputex modelling, like the CSIRO modelling, we are conducting a real-world, real-time experiment. Believe what you see written in your bill. If electricity prices were not rising, the government wouldn't spend $6.8 billion subsidising them.
Do we get from the coalition a nod to that uncertainty? Because their policy clarified, I think, today, 25, 26, they're putting a figure on a drop, and beyond that, they're saying nothing, because who knows? Is that a more, is that the fact they're only putting a 1-year time frame on what will happen for prices? Is that sort of a nod to the...
Everybody is indicating that they've got some magic way of bringing electricity prices down, and we are now too far down the track and too broken a policy to be able to fix it with any sort of ease. This is what will happen. Coal will stay in the system no matter who is in government for as long as it possibly can, because when you remove the next coal-fired power plant from the system, the price of electricity will jump, and it will jump alarmingly, because something has to fill the gap that wind and solar leaves, and that gap at the moment is being filled by coal most of the time, despite what the Minister said again today. He talks always when he talks about wind and solar, he talks about their capacity factor, not the amount of energy they actually generate. Go and look at those figures and there's a very different story. So in the end, all we want from our elected leaders, right, is a certain sense of honesty about these things, and we are not getting it.
We will pick up more at the close of the program. Chris, thank you. So price, this is what a lot of people want to know. Both leaders were asked, or leaders I should say, Minister and the Shadow Minister, they were both asked about what sort of price prediction, pledge, call it what you will, they can give over the next 3 years under their plans. Here's what they had to say.
The pledge I do give is that energy prices will be cheaper under us than under Mr O'Brien. That is the pledge, because that is what we can state categorically based on the two plans. Look, anybody who predicts energy prices in this very complicated geopolitical environment, I think, is making a punt. So I'm not going to do that. I am going to say that when the alternative plan is to introduce the most expensive form of energy available in the world, which is nuclear, that's going to have an impact. And worse, while we're waiting for that, they're going to sweat the coal assets for longer and harder. And one of the things we've seen in the Australian Energy Regulators report constantly is one of the things that drive higher prices and price spikes is unexpected outages in coal-fired power.
The analysis done independently by Frontier Economics looks at the 25-26 year, and that is the basis upon which those estimates are made of 15% lower gas prices for industry, 7% for households and 8% for wholesale electricity, which flows through around about 3%, all things being equal, to electricity bills. Now, it's notable that I can actually give you those figures because, unlike Chris's answer to you just then, they don't have anything. They've done no economic modelling. As I mentioned before, his decision-making is based on gut. The Treasurer of the country is obsessed, his own words, and the Prime Minister, in his own words, says he's creating an industrial revolution. They don't have any economic modelling. We've done the economic modelling. It's based on a comprehensive plan.
All right, so Samantha McCulloch, the crux, perhaps the simplification of the Coalition's plan is they'll cut gas and electricity largely on the basis of a levy, call it what you will, reverse tariff on gas companies. Is that going to be hard to argue against? We've got this big resource. It should be working better for Australians.
Well, look, Tom, I looked in detail at the modelling that was released yesterday, and it's still not clear from that modelling how we're arriving at these promised price reductions in electricity and gas bills for households. What the Coalition are proposing are to put a tax on exports of uncontracted gas. So this is gas that's not tied up in these long-term contracts and foundation contracts. They're proposing to force up to 100 petajoules of that gas, that's 20% more than the current market, into the system over a short-term basis to drive down prices. Now, there are a few
at a set
issues.
Price too.
Well, yes, although it's not actually clear. The $10 is
a prediction, or
has been identified as the price. How we got to that, how it's actually delivered in the market, is not entirely clear from the modelling that was released. But there are some issues that Ted actually acknowledged during the debate, that we actually don't have the infrastructure to get that amount of gas down to Victoria and those demand centres. So where is that gas going to go?
Well, he's speaking about storage, but that takes
storage is full,
a while, right? If you're going to build new storage.
Yeah, so currently the storage facilities we have in Victoria, and these are the demand centres, they're full, and they're always full before winter. So even if we could move it in the pipes, there's nowhere to store it down south. So that's one of the first practical issues with the plan. The other one is how the market will react. What does dumping that much gas into the market do for other producers? How does the market respond? And of course, we also have an issue around, this gas that's uncontracted is already offered to the Australian market first before it can be exported. That's under current arrangements, under the heads of agreement that those Queensland exporters have negotiated with the government.
Yeah, theoretically, price is the difference, as you alluded to. So $10 was it's kind of like a working figure in there rather than an ironclad one. I'm interested in your view, Kane, on the 275, because when Labor pledged that, essentially they were saying renewables are cheaper, here's what you'll save. Has that undermined support or confidence in renewables in terms of being a big part of Australia's future, because people now go, well, our prices went up, renewables must be no good? Has that done a disservice to people saying make renewables a bigger part of the economy?
Yeah, I think there's certainly an unfortunate coincidence between the increase in renewables. We've about doubled the amount of renewable energy in Australia over the last 5 years, and at the same time power prices have gone up. But I think what the modelling at that time didn't anticipate was the back end of a COVID crisis, the Russian war in the Ukraine. Indeed, now we're seeing Donald Trump and global tariff wars. These are all uncertainties that weren't known and understood at the time.
But should they have been recognised earlier? So midway through the term, Labor goes, well, look, all this has happened. The default market offer was delayed by the Coalition. We're going to miss it. Here's why, rather than taking it all the way to the election, basically?
Look, I think at the end of the day, any piece of modelling is based on assumptions at a moment in time. And clearly, not long after, a bunch of assumptions changed, a bunch of global events occurred. In fact, a lot of those related to the price of gas and the role of gas in electricity generation. Chris made the point before that gas sets the price most often in the electricity market. And a lot of those factors, therefore, materially change gas market dynamics and prices here in Australia, and therefore led to those higher prices. None of that changes the reality that renewable energy was then and is today the lowest cost form of new generation, and therefore we should be pushing as much of it into the grid as possible.
Tanya, in terms of big users of power, do they just look at various promises, whether it be Chris Bowen's or Ted O'Brien's, and go, we're not convinced, prices will just keep going up?
Well, in terms of investment, we look at the input costs overall for a range of areas. Energy has gone up quite significantly for all businesses. And I talk to each of the companies, and it could be anywhere from 30% up 60% as the average across the industry. And that's not sustainable overall. When you have a single-minded plan, and I think that's what it is at the moment. And, you know, we support renewable energy. We're very forward-leaning on getting to net zero by 2050, and renewables needs to be part of that plan. But when you have a renewables-only solution, then there is only one assumption you can make, that energy prices are going to go up. And that's why we're saying a mix of energy is really important.
What about on nuclear? So Ted O'Brien was asked, if you lose this election, will you stop advocating for it? And to me, that's not so much a political question, it's actually a timeline, because it's a short runway already. If the coalition lose this election, can they take it to 2028, or is that getting too late to start this up? Because at some point it's going to be too late, right? This will take a while to get going.
Well, it depends on how you look at nuclear energy, and we look out to 2050 and we're reverse engineering into the period that we've got at the moment. The first thing you've got to do to bring nuclear energy on in Australia is to lift the ban on nuclear within the EPBC Act, because nobody is going to look at investment in Australia. But what will happen straight away is that we're now starting to see, Canada, United States are good examples, are micro reactors. So that's small amounts of nuclear energy that you can sit in a shipping container. That's the sort of thing that we would want to see on mine sites, because we need reliable heat.
So if that tech goes really well, it might even get to 2030 and then we can just suddenly adopt it.
Exactly.
The micro, not so much bigger builds, that might be harder to get into the system. But
well, I think you'd have that for the longer term, because you've got to have that reliable energy.
But Tom, could I jump in on that? Just because I find it interesting when we say, you know, is it too late? As though we're almost at the finish line, we're almost done. We're actually just getting started. You know, if you look at our energy mix today, it's still 90% fossil fuels.
But I guess it's around replacing that coal, because there's only so long you can extend the life of some of these plants. They will get less reliable, right?
Well, we need to be deploying, I think, all, in terms of electricity, all options available. We know every time you're taking options off the table, that tends to increase the cost and the challenge in terms of the transition. But we're also only talking here, and I noticed the debate's very much focused on electricity. We talk about energy, but we're actually talking about electricity. That's only part of the equation. What about industrial energy needs? What about industrial emissions, transport, agriculture in terms of the net zero equation?
Yeah.
You know, and we know that, you know, circumstances change over time. We can't predict what things are going to look like in 2 years, let alone in 15 years. And to be taking things off the table and options off the table because we think we don't need them is premature.
Plenty more to get through. When we come back, the Coalition has released that gas plan. We'll take a closer look at a potential development within that in a moment. Welcome back to our special, the Energy Debate, the Response. Our panel with me today, we've got Ms Samantha McCulloch, Kane Thornton and Tanya Constable. So I want to play to you, we've got the gas reservation policy, obviously, that happened, was announced a couple of days ago. I want to play to you, is this possibly a development? Because there are 3 big gas exporters in Queensland. One of them, Santos, actually takes domestic gas for its export contracts. So is that part of this policy? This was the response from Ted O'Brien.
So we've made it very clear that within the first 100 days of government, we'll be settling new arrangements with the gas industry. That includes all 3. We cannot continue to have a situation where we have one of our major gas consortium taking from the domestic market and making negative contributions. That will be part of the negotiations that will take place with the gas industry.
So that will actually take aim at Santos and limit them? Is that what you're saying?
That will involve all 3 consortia. Santos is part of one. And again, Tom, this is all laid out in a very comprehensive policy a costed policy, the one to which Chris just mentioned and very cleverly said, what was he? He's read longer, menus at Chinese restaurants. And this is coming from the minister, whose own plan wouldn't fit in a Chinese fortune cookie. If anything, that's probably where it would belong, because you'd crack it open and all it would be a slogan.
Yeah, I was feeling like yum cha by the end of the debate, but they all had their zingers. So talk me through this, because I didn't see specific mention in the policy around this. What I took from Ted O'Brien was Santos, which at the moment pulls 150 or so petajoules from the domestic market because it doesn't produce enough to fulfil its export contract, will be perhaps stopped in one way. What do you understand Ted O'Brien to be saying there?
Yeah, well, Tom, just to be clear, the three Queensland LNG exporters are actually net contributors in total to the domestic market, and actually they're playing an increasingly important role in helping to keep the lights on in Victoria and sending that gas south. Santos is one part of one of those three, so we refer to Santos, but it's
the
actually
GNLG project.
Yeah, the Gladstone
Santos-led
LNG.
GNLG project.
Yeah, and this is another area where there's been some ambiguity in the Coalition's proposal. So it wasn't clear from the speeches, it wasn't clear from the frontier modelling, but where it did become clear is yesterday the Coalition published on their website a clear indication that all three of those exporters will be required to contribute to that 100 or so petajoules.
And individually or cumulative? Because that's very different in terms of each project.
Each project will be contributing. But the Coalition's also been very, very clear that they will not be interrupting export contracts in terms of those long-term foundation contracts. And that GLNG project does not have uncontracted gas. All of the gas is going towards those long-term contracts. So how the Coalition reconciles those two principles is still unclear.
So they contradict each other at the moment, because if they're saying each project has to contribute, and at the moment Santos falls short of its production, it gets gas domestically. Right now you're saying those two elements don't add up.
But it's because it's not selling uncontracted gas into the LNG spot market. Ted did say that in the first 100 days he'll work with industry. Of course, we stand ready to work with either of the major parties in terms of sensible policies to get more gas into the market. But it's just another, I think, ambiguity in terms of the Coalition policy around this particular.
So that particular thing, they don't add up right now. It's that simple.
That doesn't add up. And I would say though, much of the Coalition policy that was announced, there's been a lot of focus on this East Coast reservation, as they're calling it. It's more like an export levy or tax, but the East Coast issues. But a lot of what the Coalition has proposed is exactly what the industry has been calling for some time, in terms of supporting more gas into the market, in terms of fixing approvals processes, expanding infrastructure, developing new sources of gas supply, defunding the EDO and addressing some of the lawfare. So much of their proposal is really what we think it's on the money in terms of solving some of the challenges we're seeing on the East Coast market. Our concern is that this particular policy is going to undermine all of those other efforts.
Yeah, Tom, I think this is obviously, there's some really big questions here that haven't been answered, and I think that's really concerning and creates a major risk, because if you look at the rest of the Coalition's policy, essentially what they're saying is we're going to wait for nuclear power, and whether that's 10, 15, 20 years away, and during that time, we're going to back off on renewables and rely on a whole lot more gas. Now, firstly, gas, as we know today in the electricity market, is higher cost. And secondly, getting access to and substantially increasing electricity coming from gas-fired generation is a major challenge and risk. And I think the questions and uncertainty introduced in this latest policy only invite more questions and put more risk on a strategy where we rely on more gas for electricity and we back off on renewables.
Can I just say, though, the current AEMO ISP is relying on more gas. We've got 170% more gas coming into the system by the 2040s than we do now. Yes, we need to be able to manage having the gas-fired power generation. We need to have the infrastructure, and we need to be able to meet those surges in demand, because the demand profile for gas is becoming increasingly volatile because it's stepping in when coal's not available, when renewables aren't available, and it may be required for long periods. And then other periods it may not be required very much at all. But we need to have the infrastructure there and the gas supply there to be able to supply gas when it's needed.
So I guess the other thing, Kane, is if you look at some of the projects, I mean, Snowy Hydro, they keep getting the digger stuck and it's gone way over budget. The biggest transmission project, which is the stuff we need to get renewables into the system, has gone from 2.1 billion to 3.5 billion. So is it getting more expensive? Is this not quite turning out how it was expected to?
Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I mean, what we're moving towards is a combination of technologies and solutions. Clearly, we need to be accelerating as much wind and solar as we can because they are, pound for pound, the lowest cost. But it's not just about renewables, it's about a combination of other technologies to support and back up renewables. It is gas, it's gas today, it'll be gas in the future. But what we haven't discussed is the role of batteries. Now, they're not going to play the complete role, but over the last 3 years, we've invested $15 billion into dozens and dozens of large-scale batteries. The cost has come down dramatically. These are being deployed at pace around the country, both at large scale, but now increasingly into people's homes and small businesses.
I don't know that I agree on it being the lowest cost. It is the lowest in terms of solar and wind coming into the system right now, but it's not a systems cost approach, right? We've got a generation cost, but it's not a systems wide cost. So I think that it's not really an honest appraisal that the government are putting forward about that, you know, that whole of system. So that's what we want to see. We need, if it was the lowest cost, then we would see coal leaving the system. We wouldn't see gas in the system. We would just see renewables. And at the moment, it's pretty heavily subsidised too. So that's why we argue you need all of these particular types of energy sources to make sure you have got the least cost approach.
So what's the sweet spot? Because the Coalition has renewables at 54. It's not a cap. We'll get into that later. Labor's a lot higher than that. Somewhere in between. Probably the higher up you get and the firming gets more expensive. You know, 100% renewable grid would be really expensive. Is that just what all sides would like to know, the sweet spot, or has it become ideological on nuclear versus renewables now?
Well, that's the issue. We've made this an ideological debate as opposed to what was it supposed to be? We needed affordable, reliable, cleaner energy, and we've made it about renewables versus everything else. And that is not where we want to be. We need to get back to what was the original intent here. And first and foremost, in a situation where you've got a cost of living crisis, everybody's saying that we need cheaper energy. Business, households shouldn't be going to food banks. So we need to make sure that right now everything stays in the system and we're aiming towards something later.
Samantha won't mind if you go your hardest on this next one. So in terms of what's being put on the table, the Coalition's going pretty populist here. You know, gas for Australians, and Labor's arguably done some similar things. Is this happening because the gas industry allowed Australians at times to pay these crazy prices on what we own in Australia, and that hurts people but industry as well?
It's not. What we have seen is governments not take a decision to allow everything to remain in the system. We've now got a situation where gas was demonised over a period of time, a number of years where it was not considered appropriate to talk about the need for fossil fuels in the system, right? So that's what we've got. We've now
still a handbrake in Victoria.
It's a huge, well, it's a mess in Victoria, let's face it. So no gas exploration allowed in Victoria has caused a problem on the east coast of Australia. So it's good to see Queensland make a very pragmatic decision only recently to keep coal in the system for a longer period of time, to start gas and to...
That's the state government changing a few things there.
It is.
Were you invited into the tent on the Coalition's gas policy?
We've been working with the Coalition as we do engage with the government regularly as well.
Were you surprised at all by what was released?
The election. were familiar with most of it. Like, we had been in discussion with the coalition. We weren't aware of everything that was in the speech that night. I'm not sure all of these decisions were made well in advance, and it's not unusual that a major party might not share all the details. But if I can just comment on the issue around gas pricing, I mean, Tanya's right. Like, the pressures that we're seeing and prices going up, there are a few drivers for this. Often, we saw Chris Bowen and others have pointed to the war in Ukraine, but actually there are domestic pressures that are driving some of the increase in price pressures. We've got a declining field in Victoria in the Gippsland Basin. This has historically provided much of the East Coast gas. We've known for years and years that that's in steep decline. They're mature fields, they're coming off. We need to look for new sources of supply, but we've got a Victorian government that's demonised gas, that's had bans and moratoriums on exploring for gas, and has told the gas industry, you're not needed, your investment's not welcome.
Okay.
And here we are with a situation where Victoria is facing shortages.
Right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll take a look at the approach to renewable technology and this whole transition, a bit of a debate between the Minister and the Shadow today over what's happening. Is it a revolution or not? Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Energy Debate, The Response. Here in the studio, I've got our Sky News contributor Chris Uhlmann, Samantha McCulloch from Energy Producers Australia, Kane Thornton from Clean Energy Council, and Tanya Constable from the Minerals Council of Australia. I think I got them all right. People will just shake their heads if they didn't. It's not in the auto cue. I'm doing well. We had a bit of an interesting element of the debate today. Ted O'Brien taking issue with Labor using the term industrial revolution when it comes to the government's renewables approach and the change in the energy transition. Chris Bowen was standing by it, though.
Ted again criticises me and the Prime Minister for using the term industrial revolution. I'm sorry, it is. It is that big. I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a massive opportunity for our country. It doesn't all roll out smoothly like in a linear graph in a glossy document. You have challenges and you have setbacks. You deal with them, you grow the economy, you create jobs of the future.
The industrial revolution you want, Minister, don't you think it might be important to do the economic modelling to tell the Australian people the impact?
I'm going to do a dangerous thing here and invite Chris Uhlmann to agree with Chris Bowen on this. It's a massive change, whatever you label it. It's a complete upheaval of what we have. So maybe debate around the tag and obviously how you do it. But this is, it's got to be a revolution in a shorter period of time to the actual industrial revolution.
So last year the world burned more coal, oil and gas than ever before in human history. All the talk that we have about an energy transition is an energy addition. That's what's happening in the real world. So Chris Bowen can say what he likes. Nothing is going to be made in Australia if we don't have an energy system that works. And at the moment, on the pathway that he's put us on, we'll have an energy system that doesn't work. And energy is the economy. I know I get tired of saying this, but without it, nothing actually functions. And Australia, in the last century, we made a deal with the Australian people. We had very high wages, but we had very low energy costs. Australia cannot survive in the 21st century with both high energy costs and high wages, and that's the pathway we're on. So there won't be an industrial revolution. There will be an industrial devolution, a demolition of what we've got now. And the rest of the world, by the way, Tom, you were saying net zero will be debated here. It's a dead letter in the rest of the world. China's not doing it, India's not doing it, Russia's not doing it, and now the United States is not doing it. That's 60% of the world's emissions. Last year, we produced more emissions than we ever have before, and I predict that that will continue because it has almost every single year except for the financial crisis and when COVID shut down the planet.
Where do you think sentiment is on this, Mark Kane? Has it been a trickier issue with cost of living and power bills going up?
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, the Australian public are very focused on cost of living, and no doubt our policymakers and politicians are as well. That goes without saying. But there's a reality here that we need to remember, and that is there is a major transition in play, and the driver of that is the fact that our existing energy generation fleet is old, it's getting older, and it's going to close down. Now, exactly when it closes down is a matter of speculation and debate. But the reality is our old coal generation in particular, it's coming out of the market. Some of it already has, a whole lot more will over the next 10 years. So it's not a matter of will we transition or not. We have to make investments to replace that. And the only real question is, are we investing in the technologies and solutions that are the lowest cost to replace that old generation that's coming out of the market? And that's where, again, you rely on CSIRO, you rely on the Australian Energy Market Operator, and you rely on the decisions of investors, and that decision is very clear. They are investing in renewable energy, in wind and solar, in big batteries, in pumped hydro, in a limited amount of gas. They are the lowest cost solutions that are critically important to keeping the lights on and keeping power prices
Tanya
down.
and Samantha, you're both internationally focused. Are things shifting beneath our feet in that regard?
But what I would say, I mean, Tanya mentioned before about affordability, reliability and cleaner energy. It's the sort of trilemma that we always speak about. I would say it's a hierarchy. If you don't have affordable and reliable energy, you don't have the support for the cleaner. And I think, that's part of what we're seeing internationally, where we've got this pendulum swinging between strong support for climate action and then nothing. And this isn't good for economies. It's not good for the energy system, and it's certainly not good for reducing emissions. And so putting Australia on a path to net zero that's aligned with what's happening internationally, but also that ensures that we're maintaining our industrial base, that our industries and manufacturing are staying competitive, that we have reliable, affordable energy, including for households. That's what's going to be the key to having a smoother, more sustainable transition to net zero and avoiding these swings that we're seeing overseas.
I think what we've seen is a flip back. We spent a long time over the last 10 years looking at climate, but what the war between Russia and the Ukraine showed us was that Europe really was on the back foot in terms of energy security. So energy security suddenly became important again, that affordable, reliable energy. And that, I think, has been an eye-opener across the world. What we found was that countries like Germany, which were at the forefront of rolling out renewables, a renewables plan, and then removing nuclear from the mix, removing coal particularly from the mix, that they couldn't meet their energy needs. So that was a wake-up moment at an international level to say, OK, well, it's important to reduce emissions, but we cannot do it at the expense of having energy for households and for businesses. So
how much was Fukushima an alteration in that?
Oh, it was certainly an alteration at the time, but and
was
I
it
think
sort of an
the world
emotional reaction to a tragedy?
It was definitely an emotional reaction at the time, but importantly, no one died from the nuclear side of that tragedy. It was from the tsunami that came through. So that has been a proven point. And now
you had a lot of area that's still unlivable, though, right?
Well, it's certainly unlivable from the point of view it hasn't got back to the standard it was overall. But nobody died at that point in time and haven't since in terms of the nuclear issue.
I'm going to tie in the nuclear issue because the other thing Ted O'Brien was asked today was around would he cap renewables? The modelling he's relying on for his nuclear plan says renewables will come in at about 54% of the grid. Does that mean that's all they will come in at under the coalition? Here was his response. Frontier economic models have renewables at 54% of the energy mix. Is that your policy to cap renewables at that percent?
No, there's no policy that we have which is capping any technology. Again, it's why I refer to sort of, again, it's a dishonesty.
Well, that means your modelling's wrong.
On Chris's behalf.
Well, your modelling's wrong or the policy's wrong. Both can't be true. Your modelling says 54%. Both can't be true.
Thanks for the tip, Chris. So given, again, the modelling has been done, estimating the amount of technology from each energy source. And you're right, renewables are going to be key. So too will gas, so too will storage, so too will nuclear.
So the thing that I find interesting about that is all these sums on how economic nuclear is how much there will be and how often it's running. If renewables end up much higher than that, does that sort of put a question mark under the economics of nuclear? Because according to that modelling, it sort of needs to be 38% to be that economical, does it not?
Oh, no, I think everyone's doing modelling at the moment, and modelling is only as good as the assumptions that you put into the system. But they're arguing from different standpoints at the moment. The ISP system is it certainly only is the government's policy plan. The gen costs, the CSIRO's gen costs are only just that generation costs. They don't have systems costs. And you've got Ted O'Brien that is looking out to 2050 and saying, well, what do we need in the system to actually allow for, again, affordable, reliable and low-cost, low emissions energy, and nuclear must be in the mix. So he's done a plan on that basis that you've got to get three legs of the stool in the system. So I think the cost that he's got is what probably most engineers around the world are saying the cost of energy is, based on the nuclear that is in the system at an international level. And that's what we should be looking at. What is in the system at that international level? We won't know what Australia is going to do until, again, you lift the ban and you get investors starting to look at Australia and Australian prices.
Yeah. Look, I think it's interesting how much confidence we place in these models. Now, my role before this was at the International Energy Agency, where I spent a lot of time looking at models. This is what the International Energy Agency is renowned for. We had a sign up in the office that said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And we need to be looking at these models to say, OK, they should be used to guide policy decisions, but not dictate them. So
maybe have parameters rather than such specific percents as well.
Just because it says 53%, that doesn't mean it should be a cap or a target, or it's about understanding what's the least cost approach to getting to, in this case, net zero by 2050.
We've got a lot to get through. We're going to have a quick break. When we come back, get our final thoughts on the panel and also talk an interesting tidbit from Ted O'Brien on emissions today. Stay with us. You are watching Energy Debate, the response here thrashing out a significant day of the campaign. This is the only energy and climate debate we're going to have, at least at this stage. It was held earlier at the National Press Club. Here in the studio, Chris Uhlmann, Samantha McCulloch, Kane Thornton and Tanya Constable. Now, a lot to talk about, and nobody really cares about my opinion. I'll get the panels because they've usually got hotter takes, in particular Chris Uhlmann. Sum up the debate, the day, the year, the decade, anything you'd like.
Well, the thing is that neither major party has a plan to bring down energy prices. That is clear. They are baked in now. They are going to continue to rise. What will set the price of electricity in the future will be what generates it at the marginal price at time of peak demand. That will always be a storage source or a fuel source, because it won't be wind and solar, for the simple reason the sun will be setting at the times of peak demand. So because of that, and don't forget that batteries and hydro are an arbitrage business. They will buy low, they'll sell high. They'll make money off that time, and they'll be much more expensive than what we had in the past, which was brown coal and black coal. So the prices are now set. They're going to get higher and higher. The question is how high? And I think when you look at how much renewable energy you should have in a system, look around the world at those that are doing what we're doing. Germany, the UK, California, highest electricity prices in the world, always in the place that are trying to do what we're doing.
Samantha?
Look, coming back to some of the themes at the start, energy is so fundamental to our competitiveness, to the economy. We know we need to be focused on having reliable and affordable energy. Gas is going to be a key part of that. No matter which pathway we take going forward, we know we need to get more gas into the system. Look, whether it's gas, whether it's renewables or any other major project, unless we start to address things like our approvals system, we're not going to get very far very fast. So looking at our environmental approvals, we talk about nuclear taking too long. I can point you to gas projects that have taken more than a decade in approvals and still aren't getting up. We just can't afford that as an economy going forward if we want to be rolling out ample energy for our industrial sector.
Kane?
Yeah, some big questions, some big challenges and a lot of complexity. But I think one of the big themes that was missed today was the fact that sitting at home watching this, in fact, trying to make sense of it all, is 4 million Australian homes that have currently got rooftop solar. They're saving themselves $1,000 a year from their power bill. And in fact, there wasn't any discussion about home batteries and the enormous role that they can play, both in supporting those same householders, take another $1,000 off their power bill, as well as help to support the energy system more widely, which is good for all consumers. So the average punter trying to make sense of this, there's a lot at stake for them, but there's a lot of them that are already saving a lot of money and seeing the direct benefits of more renewables and a home battery on their home.
I had it on my list, but there was a lot of disagreement, so I struggled to fit it in. Tanya?
There was no savings of $1,000. taxpayers just got back some of the taxes that they have paid. The fact is that we started from a higher base in terms of energy costs, and it's just a little bit lower for people right now. So we have to find a way to make sure we've got a least cost approach, and that is governments need to get rid of this ideological approach that they have about single technologies. We need it all, and we need to bring it on now. No country in the world is just going down a narrow route of renewables.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks to our panellists and industry partners as well. Stay with us after the break. Political editor Andrew Clennell will break down the rest of the day on the election campaign on Politics Now.
Energy Debate The Response is in partnership with Australian energy producers, Minerals Council of Australia, Clean Energy Council, Herald Sun, The Daily Telegraph, The Courier Mail and The Advertiser.